Hey, babe, and anybody else watching, and welcome back to A Life Together. Today, Judges 15, 16, and 17. If you remember yesterday, we were looking at Jephthah, however you say that, and Ephraim. We looked also at the birth and the marriage of Sampson. And that's actually where we're going to pick up today, is his vengeance on the Philistines, his secret with Delilah, most famous story there, and then his death and capture, and then also Micah's idols. So again, this is 15, 16, and 17 of Judges. So, chapter 15. Later on, at the time of wheat harvest, Sampson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. He said, "I'm going to my wife's room," but her father would not let him go in. "I was so sure you thoroughly hated her," he said, "that I gave her to your friend. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead." Sampson said to them, "This time, I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them." So he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torches, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the stalks and standing grain, together with the vineyards and olive groves. When the Philistines asked who did this, they were told, "Sampson, the Timonite's son-in-law, because his wife was given to his friend." So the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. Sampson said to them, "Since you've acted like this, I won't stop until I get my revenge on you." He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. Then he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines went up and camped in Judah, spreading out near Lehi. The men of Judah asked, "Why have you come to fight us?" "We have come to take Samson prisoner," they asked. "Do to him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us?" He answered, "I merely did to them what they did to me." They said to him, We've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." Samson said, "Swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves." "Agreed," they answered. "We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came down upon him, shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Then Samson said, "With the donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With the donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men." When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was called Ramoth-Lehi. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, "You have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" Then God came up with a hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. When Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. So the spring was called En-Hakkore, and it is still there in Lehi. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Chapter 16. One day, Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, "Samson is here." So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, "At dawn, we'll kill him." But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate, together with the 2 posts, and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Some time later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him, so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Samson said to her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh thongs that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh thongs that had not been dried, and she tied him up with them. With the men hidden in the room, she called to them, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the thongs as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come now and tell me how you can be tied." He said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. Then, with men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the ropes off his arm as if they were threads. Delilah said to Samson, "Until now you have been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied." He replied, "If you weave 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with a pin, I'll become as weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with the pin. Again she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke from his sleep and pulled up the pin and the loom with the fabric. Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me, and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was tired to death. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazirite set apart to God since birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, "Come back once more. He has told me everything." So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. Having put him to sleep on her lap, she called a man to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke from the sleep and thought, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza, binding him with bronze shackles. They set him to grinding in the prison, but the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Now, the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, "Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands." When people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain." While they were in high spirits, they shouted, "Bring out Samson to entertain us." So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support this temple, so that I may lean against them." Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, "O sovereign Lord, remember me. O God, please strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Then Samson reached towards the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. Then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel 20 years. Chapter 17. Now, a man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim said to his mother, "The 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and about which I heard you utter a curse, I have that silver with me. I took it." Then his mother said, "The Lord bless you, my son." When he returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother, she said, "I solemnly consecrate my silver to the Lord for my son to make a carved image and a cast idol. I will give it back to you." So he returned the silver to his mother, and she took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to a silversmith, who made them into the image of an idol, and they were put in Micah's house. Now this man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and some idols, and installed one of his sons as a priest. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. A young Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, who had been living with the clan of Judah, left that town in search of some other place to stay. On his way, he came to Micah's house in the hill country of Ephraim. Micah asked him, "Where have you come from?" "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah," he said, "and I'm looking for a place to stay." Then Micah said to him, "Live with me, and be my father and priest, and I'll give you 10 shekels of silver a year, your clothes and your food." So the Levite agreed to live with him, and the young man was to him like one of his sons. Then Micah installed the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and he lived in his house. And Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since this Levite has become my priest." I think that verse sums it up so well. What was it? 17. Where are we? I just lost it. I just lost it. That verse that says, in those days, everyone did as they saw fit. And I mean, I think that's so important to recognize too. When we see this in Judges, this is a crazy time. Just because something is described in the Bible doesn't mean that it's prescribed in the Bible. It doesn't mean that it's something we should do, or it doesn't mean that it's something that God has endorsed. Yes, maybe he has allowed it to happen for various reasons. It could be judgment. It could be any number of reasons. But that doesn't mean God approves of it, as that verse says. And I think that's so important. 16, and 17. Chapter 16, verse 16 and 17. This is Delilah talking to Sampson. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was tired to death. So he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I have been a Nazirite set apart to God since birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. And I think it's so sad. I mean, we look at that and we recognize that he has just fully compromised in a massive way. And he's compromised in a way that it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, we see the nagging, absolutely, for at least a week. Just a insane amount of nagging has happened. But, I mean, we see that Delilah is tying him up and trying to bind him every night. And she's saying, the Philistines are upon you. What is the best case scenario that Sampson was thinking would happen? I mean, I guess maybe if he didn't find those Philistines, I mean, the Philistines are in the room with him, but we don't see any confrontation all the other times. So presumably they remain hidden and they sneak out during the night. But if he knew they were there, then obviously there's going to be some retribution. But either way, he's got to be thinking that this is really odd and not a good indicator, and yet he compromises. And it's always frustrating to me to read that and recognize how much he compromises. And yet, I remember in my own life how often and how easy it is to compromise and give up standards because society makes that so easy. But it's incredibly important to not compromise. Worth praying about. God, I just thank you for this day. I thank you for your word. As always, Lord, I thank you for the examples in your word of your son. And we know that he never compromised, God. And yet we also see what happens when we do compromise our faith, or when we do compromise your word, when we choose not to believe. God, I pray for strength for us, that you would give us fortitude, that when the world would continue nagging and trying to beat us down, that we would look to you and to you alone, that we would not compromise or give up our faith, but that we would remain steadfast and strong, Lord, so that you would not leave us. I thank you so much, God, for your son. I thank you for what he accomplished on the cross. Jesus, I thank you for living that life. In your son's name we pray. Amen. And yeah, that is about all I have for you today. As always, know that I appreciate you. Wife, appreciate you tons. And I will plan on seeing you tomorrow. Have a good one.